Hello, everybody. It's Father Tony, and I'm just really looking forward to spending some time with you all to share with you the different designs of the interior of St. Paul's Church that have been worked on and developed primarily by our architect, but also in collaboration with several members of our parish, including the co-chairs of our campaign, the Blacks and the Hollandans, some of our staff like Vicky and others. So we've been working on it since May of this past year, and we've looked at a lot of different options. And we now want to begin a communal conversation about what is the next step for St. Paul's. In these designs that you're going to see, I really want to emphasize that what these designs represent are options. These are not certainties, they're not guarantees, but they are options that have been explored in our committee for a variety of reasons. For this presentation, it's really important for you to engage your imagination because we're going to look at some designs and some elements that in various ways can be combined and recombined to give us the final look of the interior of our house. It is God's house. You know, it's not my house, it's not your house. Though it is those things, it's our house, and ultimately it's also God's house. And how his house arranged has some particular details that we have to be attentive to. And so also the archdiocese themselves will look at these designs, and they've already looked at some of the designs to give us feedback and at times requirements of elements they want to see changed or adjusted. So as we look at this together, just remember that we are in conversation with a lot of other people besides ourselves. That's important for me to remember. I've told many of you all that you are going to live in this church a lot longer than I am. So you need to engage as much prayerful discernment of these different designs to help us with that conversation as a family. What do we want, our home to look like? Our home where God resides. As we know from our own home improvement, we don't always get everything we want, but I'm very confident that God will give us everything we need. And I know that I need, and our parish needs, your voice, your prayerful reflection on these designs to help us to know and make a good decision together as a family. So without any further ado, let's look at these designs. These designs have weird names. I'm going to call them design 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So our first design, at the top here, it's called Floor Plan Scheme B1 Rev 3, which means revision number 3. We looked at a lot of different options. I'm just calling this design number 1 because it's the first one we're going to look at. We have to look at this floor plan first to get a sense of what is happening in this design. This design encapsulates the first command I gave the architect, which is give us a design with the altar where it currently is placed. Back in 1978 to 1982, the community went through lots of discussions, as we're doing now, about where do we place the altar after the Second Vatican Council, and that decision was made right at this spot, kind of right in the middle of the nave, right in line with the side doors that these days is our main entrance. So the architect created a design based off of his kind of reflection and some of our feedback with the altar here in the middle. You're going to see in this design and all designs a handicap ramp. This is because of regulation that's developed since 1982, which says that if we do any alteration to this main platform, well, we need to provide a way for handicap access up into that sanctuary. And with an older presbyterate, that is becoming something that makes a lot of sense for us. We have the altar right here. We also have an ambo, which is where the gospel is proclaimed. The presider and the deacon or the servers will sit here. We have a tabernacle moved to the middle, but that's optional. The tabernacle could easily be placed on the wall, but in this scheme, it's right here in the middle. And then notice our baptismal font is right here by the door as you come in. That's actually a requirement of the church that baptismal fonts are close to doors because baptism represents our entrance into the church. Now currently we have our baptismal font kind of in the corner, and this architect placed it off to the side. So if we look at what this looks like ultimately, here is these elements. Again, the baptismal font is off to the side. This main altar has been placed in the center. Here's the presider's chair, tabernacle, and the ambo. And you can see what our handicap ramp would look like off to the side. There's a couple other things that this view provides us that view of the floor plan does not provide. First, look at the side here. We have these two niches that originally had an altar to Joseph on the right and Mary on the left. We have no need for those side altars, and the church, in fact, doesn't want us to put in side altars, but we have designed a little area for devotion to Mary on the left and St. Joseph on the right. They have a little bit of this green marble, which is being integrated into the altar and in the top platform by the tabernacle, and here at the ambo and the baptismal font. So that marble kind of wraps a little bit of those statues. They would be the original statues that we still have in the church. And then on this blue coloration, that represents potential mosaic that would be in that space. Now that mosaic hasn't been designed, it hasn't been elaborated on, but it's an idea of putting a mosaic on the left and on the right that also matches this mosaic of perhaps or probably of St. Paul that would be in the back of the sanctuary. Getting all three of those to match makes sense from an artistic perspective, and so that's some of the mindset of the architect. Notice here we have this very large structure in the middle of the sanctuary, very similar in some ways to what you all referred to previously as the wall, which separated the sanctuary from the space where the altar is. The architect, and we certainly agree, feel like some artistic piece is needed here to delineate these two spaces, especially with the altar being moved so far forward. That also allows for a back chapel area of some sort of devotion for the congregation. Again, I want you to use your imagination. Just because this is how it's designed, we should also imagine we could do this exact same design, but with the tabernacle on the back wall where it currently is. And these pews that are currently facing the tabernacle would then be facing the mosaic and facing that back wall. Again, just trying to use our imagination to think about this space, being informed by the architect, but also not limiting ourselves exclusively to what we see in this picture. Here's another angle of this particular floor plan number 1. Again, seeing kind of right down the middle of the nave and looking at our architecture in that way. You can look at your handouts for more. The only thing I would point out is these stained glass windows, the blues and the aquas that are in them, is part of the reason why we feel like some sort of blue, not just blue, but some sort of blue tinting coloration theme would be the probable theme for these mosaics of St. Paul, Mary, and Joseph. We now have a second design. We continued talking to the architect, and another option would be moving the altar no longer completely in line with the door, but moving it back about 6 feet. We have the ambo now right next to the altar. The handicap ramp stays in the same spot. Presider in general is the same. The baptismal font is now by St. Joseph. St. Joseph is the patron of the Universal Church, so it's fitting for a baptismal font to be near him. We have the tabernacle on the back wall, just where it currently is. And notice that this big peninsula that we currently have, it's been reshaped to kind of a half circle. It is a half circle in the congregation. So it kind of retains that roundedness feel of the congregation being gathered around the altar. But because the altar has been moved back, we've also, the architect has put in these curved pews. We tried to put the original pews that we currently have there, but because of the angle and the tightness of these are called transepts, these kind of arms of the cross, Because the angle is so shallow there, it looks like we probably need to get rid of those current pews and replace them with these curved pews. He has this word here, respaced pews. Some of you have experienced that our pews in the center of the nave, that those pews are too close. General spacing says that pews should be 34 inches apart from center, and ours are 31 to 32 inches apart. So when many of you go down to kneel, you can kick the kneeler behind you because, well, it's because those pews are really tight. It was one of the consequences of moving the altar out so far in the 1982 renovation. They had to tighten up those pews, and you all are paying a bit of the price of that. But of course, we've learned to manage. Let's look at this view, the view of this design number 2 from upper right. So we're looking down. Again, a lot of the similar themes. The wall, that architectural element has been removed here. We just have this wall that currently is standing up. The architect has placed some artistic embellishment of that wall, which would be, I think, very good. It'd be good to, if we retain the wall as it currently is, to leave it in, not just to leave it in place, but to give it some sort of artistic enhancement. It's important to leave this wall here in this scheme because notice we have 1, 2, 3 steps, but in the back sanctuary there's actually only 2 steps up. So if you remove this wall, you actually risk somebody kind of falling off that back step of the sanctuary. So there's a functional reason why that is in place. It also, again, helps delineate and separate this back portion where we currently have chairs facing the tabernacle, facing that back wall as an area of devotion. So even though we don't have the whole wall placed up, it does give some visual and literal separation of the 2 spaces. The handicap ramp is retained in this design, but it's, again, kind of off to this left side. It looks like it gets pretty close to Mary, so that's a concern that we have looking at this design. How will that ramp function in the end? It's an unresolved issue with this design. But there's a lot about this design that we really like, and I really like as well. Particularly with the baptismal font off to the side, you have all of these elements in one space. And there's a lot about this that is reminiscent of the 1982 renovation, but also a lot about it that is new and would be different and really helpful for particularly moving as a presider with servers and deacons, kind of moving around this space. We're looking at this view straight on, so there's, again, a lot about this visually that looks very similar to our current church. The cross is retained in its spot. The only thing I really notice about this is the handicap ramp off to the left, and again, we have our mosaic and statue of Mary on the left, and the mosaic with a statue of Joseph on the right. That is design number 2 that we're looking at. It's called, in very nerdy language, scheme B2 revision 4, but number 2 for us. Let's look now at a third scheme. We presented several of these to the diocese. We've also presented this third scheme to the diocese. We began to wonder and imagine and ask ourselves as a committee, what if we put the altar completely in line with this edge of the sanctuary? So putting the altar directly below the cross. And we asked the architect, can you give us a design with the altar in that location? Now, this is a good lesson for all of us because you don't always get what you want. The architect came back and said, hey guys, I listened to what you said, but I decided to put the altar out in front a little bit more. And his reason was the following. He said, actually, you need this handicap ramp here. We need some way to get access into the sanctuary. And if you put the altar in the middle, he felt like there was no good way for him as the architect to get this ramp up into the sanctuary. And so we'll look at this scheme. Again, we don't get always what we want. We get what is given to us. And I thought this was a really interesting design from the architect. Because of the altar being so close to the part of the sanctuary, notice that these side parts of the transept, these pews are now facing forward. all the way forward, all the way. There's no, notice this right here, dot right here, these are the first pillars of our church, the inside of the church. So no pews go past that part, giving us plenty of space out in front, plenty of space to get a casket in and to bring it in front in the case of a funeral. But there might be something else that you're not noticing in this floor plan that's really important. So he's respaced the pews to give us more space. These are all facing forward. But look at what's happening in the back of the church. In the back of the church, what we've done, our pews currently go to about this point in the church, that back line. Now, as soon as you come in these back doors, boom, you hit pews. We've asked the architect to move all the pews forward so that none of them begin until the very front of this pillar, or these two pillars that are in the back of the church. And that opens up this whole space for something like our baptismal font. Again, it's backed by a door, the entrance to the church. Notice this part of the church, that's where the confessional is, which there's a great relationship between baptism and confession. It's the place of forgiveness of sins. This window right here is one of our stained glass windows. If you remember, our stained glass windows are the sacraments, and the sacrament depicted in this window is baptism. Back in the spot where we hear confessions now, that's actually where baptisms used to be heard. So there's a lot of reasons why the baptismal font should be in this design in this back part of the church, which originally was the front of the church. Now we have it off center a little bit. The diocese asked us, and frankly is probably going to require us if we use this design, to put the baptismal font in the center so that you have the baptismal font, the altar, the tabernacle, and the cross all in one continuous line with one another. There's lots of theology behind that. That's important. We have our musicians in this back portion of the church. We will also have musicians in the upper portion, in the choir loft, which is a place certainly for choral accompaniment and music to be performed. But we also have a space particularly for our contemporary ensemble, which does great work as a choir and needs a dedicated space with plugins for their amplifiers and their musical instruments and microphones, etc. So we don't know if we'll put the piano and the organ console down here or just the piano. That all needs to be resolved. But the idea would be music would be in this back portion and in the choir loft, and then the baptismal font on the side. Everything then processes forward down the center of the church. Let's look at this from the inside. We have our same mosaic. The cross is above exactly where it currently is. Our altar, we have wood flooring has been depicted in all of these. That is not a guarantee. This back sanctuary is currently terrazzo, and we don't know if we can put wood floor on that terrazzo. We don't know if we want to put wood floor on that terrazzo, but to give it a consistent look in this scheme, he's created a wood flooring throughout this part of the sanctuary. We can look at it head on here. Again, a lot that's very similar. The one thing I want to point out, which the diocese pointed out when I presented this scheme to them, they really did not like this handicap ramp. And frankly, neither did we as a committee when we looked at it, and neither did the architect. The architect didn't like the visual look of it either. He just said, guys, we've got to get a way for handicap access into this space, and this is the only way, or at least the best way that I'm seeing to do it. That makes a lot of sense. We want to do what works best for the space, but the Archdiocese actually encouraged us and gave us permission to think of another way to do this design without this handicap ramp, without kind of the awkwardness that it creates. It's just such a tight space for a really long ramp. It has to be 14 feet long because it goes up two steps, and you need 7 feet per step, so it gives you 20 or 14 feet total. So that kind of like long, windy handicap ramp just feels like it clogs the space and distracts the attention of the viewer from what you would want it to do, which you'd rather it kind of complement and enrich our worship of God and not kind of get in the way. So we went back to the drawing board and we created a fourth scheme. The architect did. We again, had talked about this possibility of the altar in the center, but things began to get crowded. So we're now looking at scheme D, as it's called, or scheme number 4. No longer is the altar out here, but when you try to put the altar in line, it gets crowded with the ambo and the presider's table. And so we have actually the altar receded a bit deeper into the sanctuary. There's a couple things that is nice about this. It allows for movement around the altar. As the presider, we often have to incense the altar. So it gives you nice room to move around it. It also gives us plenty of room for weddings. When we need the couple to come forth to the altar, they can kneel very easily in that space. Again, there's plenty of room for a casket here in the middle of the congregation, which is where it will be placed in the instance of a funeral. But if you have the altar right there, it begins to get the altar and the casket and all that stuff happening in front kind of jammed. The presider's chairs have been moved to the side. A lectern for the musicians, maybe a musician coming from the back of the church, they need to come forward for the responsorial psalm. They can come proclaim that psalm from this lectern, or certainly a psalm. You can use the ambo for responsorial psalms because that's scripture, but anything that's not scripture, like an opening hymn or a closing hymn, the lectern would be used. Notice these transepts. We've removed several of these pews. We thought on some of the schemes, even having the pews up this far, this close in the congregation, was just getting too crowded by the door, so we've removed them. And it also creates, if you put a pew here, it creates an awkward angle looking at the altar. But with the pews kind of stopping right here, it allows this area to function as handicap access. It allows this area to function as a handicap access. And even this area, someone with a wheelchair or multiple wheelchairs, and you could put their wheelchair there, and you could even have fold-out chairs or wooden chairs for maybe a family member to sit next to them without the cumbersome kind of maneuvering through crowded pews. So opening this space has lots of advantages on both sides. We have our Mary statue with some devotional space in front of them, Joseph statue with some 2 kneelers and candles, devotional space in front of them. The musicians are in the back. The baptismal font is in the back of this scheme as well. Where's the handicap ramp? Well, Vicky's idea was that actually they make handicap lifts instead of ramps. And when we mentioned this to the architect, he said, oh yeah, I forgot to share that with you guys, that's an option, but certainly it is one that we can consider. And so what we have back here in this back room, which currently is being used as a storage space, we have a lift, a mechanical lift, an electronic lift that a person can just press a button. It will raise them up 2 steps and allow them to enter the sanctuary. So that is where a handicap ramp is located. We have the ambo and the altar and presider kind of in a triangular shape. They're not in a consistent line, but they're in a triangle, which is a design precedent for many other churches, and one way to kind of get all of this, these elements, the proclamation of the Word of God, the altar of sacrifice, the seating for the presider, getting all these elements in one space, but not in a crowded way. Let's look at some designs on the inside of the church, because there's a key thing that the architect has done. Because of the altar and the tabernacle and the ambo and the lectern kind of all being gathered in this space, he's placed the crucifix on the wall. Now again, that's not something that has to be done, but it's something that this particular scheme invites for serious consideration, because all of the sacrificial elements are now kind of being coalesced and gathered into one space. And that, in fact, is the purpose of this whole area, which is called a sanctuary. Sanctuary comes from the Latin word sanctus, which means holy. You might remember sanctus, 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 which in English we say is holy, holy, holy. This is the holiest area of the church. This is the area for the reposition of the tabernacle. This is why these stained glass windows that we have images of bulls being sacrificed, and the 10 Commandments, and the Ark of the Covenant. This whole area in the back of the church has special symbols to cue us into, hey, what's happening back here is really special. And not only is it kind of special, but that's why you go up just 2 steps to get into that space. And you're going to a higher place, a higher realm. We talk about the liturgy as a meeting between heaven and earth, and this space is kind of the heaven. Now, again, very human people are up there. We have readers up there, we have priests, and we have servers, but it's separate. It's holy. It's the holy of holies. And given that kind of concentration, a cross on that back wall begins to make sense with, again, some sort of accompanying mosaic around it. You could easily retain the crucifix where it is in that upper portion, but we just have to be aware of our line of sight naturally heading towards the altar and tabernacle. And to look at the cross, now we're looking up and kind of almost at the lower part of the ceiling, which is kind of, not the most attractive tiles and things like that in the background, whereas bringing it down to this level allows the eye to kind of keep all eyes and all focus on Christ. You can see these little devotional kneelers and the candles that are gathered around the Blessed Mother. There's a little more space to do that now because we don't have the handicap ramp getting crowding out that area. And then here's one more head-on look. These are the tiles that I was referring to that you kind of notice when you look up at the cross. Again, I want you to use your imagination. The architect has white windows here. That's not true. Those are stained glass windows that are blue. And so there's already kind of a blue aqua tint to that backspace, which this mosaic would seek to mimic. The architect has also placed some green marble that mimics what would be on the altar, and a gold band going all the way around the mosaic. You can see some of that gold outline here in the ambo as well, as he's currently has it designed. Those are the design schemes that we've looked at so far. I hope you get a chance to look through them and consider them and prayerfully reflect on them. As you guys have comments and questions as they come up, I hope you'll get in touch with any of the members of our steering committee, or you can get in touch with me, or don't have to get in touch with us. Just pray about it. Pray for our community. I asked one person, I said, do you care about what's happening inside our church? They said, I care that it's being redesigned, but I don't care how it's redesigned. Okay, if that's your opinion, that's great. And that's really helpful to have. But we also want to hear what your concerns are, what you like most, what are the elements that stir within you the most. I didn't put it in this presentation, but the one element that has been fixed is the depiction of the conversion of St. Paul, which I mentioned to you all at our information fellowship meetings, at some of our other meetings. We have an artist from Southern Indiana. His name is Nick Ring. He's done many pieces of art in the area, particularly at St. Meinrad when they redid their church back in the 1990s. And he's put together a beautiful rendition of the conversion of St. Paul, which will be the main piece at the base of the altar. And so we're really looking forward to integrating that and keeping that as part of our renovations of the space and giving a source of contemplation for the community on the life of St. Paul, because currently I am the presider. I'm the one gets to look at St. Paul in the choir loft, but you all just have to look at the altar and me, which I would rather you have the opportunity to look at also a beautiful depiction of the conversion of Paul. So that element is being worked on as well. Thank you for considering all this, and I look forward to our communal conversation together. God bless.